The Industrial War was not simply a war of quantity. It was also a war of quality. The Allies and the Axis competed to equip their armed forces with better weapons. The secret weapon, the new weapon, features large in the fiction of the war. Science and technology did play a great part in the fighting. In March 1943, in a battle of this high-technology war, the British Royal Air Force mounted its famous Dambuster raid. Using a revolutionary bomb that bounced on the surface of water, the RAF attacked the 3 dams in Germany's industrial region. The attack required great bravery and skill of the pilots to fly a big, high-altitude strategic bomber, the Lancaster, at low level. History merges with myth in the Dambuster story. The raid cannot be counted a success. Although there was much flooding, industry was hardly affected, and the dams soon repaired. The secret weapon, the bouncing bomb, was never used again. Many of the innovations were far less dramatic, but had greater impact. Allied fighter pilots in air-to-air combat enjoyed the advantages of the proximity fuse, a wartime invention. A miniature radar would explode shells as they neared the enemy aircraft. Science contributed in many ways. Scientists and mathematicians created the new discipline of operational research into the way military operations were conducted. The optimum search pattern used by an aircraft hunting a U-boat would be the product of scientific calculation. Much of this work remained intensely secret, unseen by the civilian and the ordinary soldier. In March 1943, the greatest secrets still remained buried deep, their full meaning known to but a few. The war of technology, though, was not one-sided. Germany had its own scientists, and in the months to come, Britain would feel the impact of Nazi secret weapons. The Dambuster raid was an exception to the RAF's usual tactics, and using the Lancaster throughout 1943, the intensity of the British Air Force's nighttime attacks grew ever greater. The British planes flew high at night and used area bombing. Their targets were not individual buildings or places, but entire cities or towns. Effectively, the bombs were aimed at the civilian population. In late July 1943, more than 3,000 RAF bombers attacked the city of Hamburg and caused the first man-made firestorm. The intensity of bombing, plus natural weather conditions, caused thousands of small fires to merge into one giant inferno. A huge fireball sat upon the city. It sucked in air at such speed that hurricane-force winds were created, and temperatures raised to at least 800 degrees Celsius across an area of 22 square kilometers. 45,000 people were incinerated or simply asphyxiated in this one single attack. To place these deaths in a grim context, in the whole 6 years of war, German attacks on Britain killed just over 60,000 civilians. The United States Air Force mounted massive daylight raids aiming to make precisely targeted attacks upon targets of strategic importance. The U.S. Air Force had practiced these surgical strikes against French targets. In these attacks, they operated under the cover of friendly fighters. In spring 1943, the U.S. AAF left its escorts behind and attacked targets deep in Germany. The crews of both American and British bombers needed courage. There were few more dangerous jobs in any regular armed forces. Nearly half of the young men who flew these missions never came home. German air defenses became ever more efficient with radar-guided anti-aircraft fire. The Luftwaffe perfected night fighter tactics, and the German fighters were as deadly to unescorted bombers in daylight as had the Spitfires and Hurricanes of the RAF been in the Battle of Britain. The losses of the attacking aircraft were extremely high. When, in the autumn of 1943, the RAF began to attack Berlin, over a period of 5 months, it lost more than half its total strength, attacking just that one city. Losses on the American side were equally as bad, and in the end, the bombers had to be withdrawn. It was only the vast industrial effort that sustained the two air forces in their attacks. The strategic bomber offensive consumed perhaps half of the entire British war expenditure. It has been convincingly argued that in 1943, the strategic air offensive cost America and Britain more than was gained by the attacks on Germany. After the terrible Hamburg firestorm, production in the city was back at 80% of normal in just 5 months. During and since the war, debate has raged about both the military value and the absolute morality of strategic bomber offensives. Even during the war, the rights and wrongs of these attacks on civilian targets caused disagreement, which persists to this day. To many, the architect of British area bombing strategy, Air Marshal Arthur Harris, is classed as a war criminal. In the context of the war, the deaths of perhaps as many as 1 million German civilians to these attacks have to be weighed against millions of other losses. Germany's major effort in the war was focused in the east. The defeat at Stalingrad in January 1943 had left Hitler shaken and fearful of decision, and had left the Soviet forces temporarily exhausted. Russian offensives to follow up the Stalingrad success failed and were thrown back easily by the Germans. The German command knew that if victory were ever to be won, an offensive must be quickly mounted before new Soviet reinforcements could be brought to bear. A plan was devised to attack and destroy the Soviet forces at Kursk, where a large salient protruded from the line dividing the two armies. This would be Germany's last chance to win the war in the east. The Soviets, realizing attack was imminent, poured resources into the area, creating massive defenses. Huge numbers of Russian artillery sat in prepared positions. On July 5th, 1943, the Germans attacked. The Battle of Kursk remains the largest tank battle in history. 4,000 Russian tanks met 3,000 German machines. For 10 days, a battle, the like of which none had seen before, raged. The tanks engaged in a near continuous melee, individual tank versus individual tank. The Germans nearly won, but their losses were too great. Nazi strength was exhausted. The German tank strength was cut to less than a quarter. The last offensive ended in failure, with the destruction of the entire German reserve tank force. After Kursk, the German forces could never again take the initiative. The losses were so great, they could never again be made up. Hitler ordered that the German army retreat behind a specially constructed line of defenses to be called the East Wall and hold that line.